we can start.
Hey, I think I'm going to kick off.
Yeah, we see a better view now.
Right. The first thing I wanted to offer here is a slide that comes from Bernard's book, and is Bernard's Laws of Observation and Action. And he is saying there that conversations in everyday life, I'm trying to, may approximate the form of scientific conversations more or less closely. To capture this overall state of affairs concerning the conversations of human observers, Bernard has formulated 5 laws of observation and action, and they are the 5 that are shown below. Can Bernard explain to us what does that mean? Bernard?
Hello, yes.
I'm asking you to explain the slide that is in front of us.
Right, I can't. I'm just trying to use earphone. Let me try these.
Can you see the screen, Bernard?
Oh yes, I've now. I'm using for the. I'm using my PC to see the display and to speak, but I'm using my smartphone with earphones to hear.
Right.
Some drivers, so I can hear you and I can now see the screen.
Right, fantastic. In which case, my question is, what do these 5 laws mean?
Oh, well, they mean what they say, Raul, that wherever we are, whatever we're doing, whatever we're thinking about, first of all, there's always a bigger picture. The way this is expressed by Spencer Brown is that the universe will always expand to escape our telescopes. In other words, however much we try to understand the big picture, there's always more. And it depends on what you're going to adopt a frame of reference, and you're going to let's have a look at the sky. You know, there's the sun. Oh look, there's the galaxy. Oh look, there's galaxies of galaxies and galaxies, and there's a big bang, and there's what? Nothing beyond it. So there's always a bigger picture, and so I really literally just mean what they say.
Right. How do you connect these to action?
Well, because, well, actually, put it another way, observation is a form of action. So but we use observation to guide our action, and our action in turn changes our observations. So as we observe, we act, and as we act, we observe. So there's a continual circularity here that you find. So originally they were the laws of observation, and when I thought about it a bit more, I thought, well, observations guide action, and then actions affect observation. So I put them as the laws of observation and action.
The question I have is that I think as cyberneticians, we are interested to act upon the world in which we are operating. So action in this case means to interact with other people. Do these laws help interact with people, or are they abstract propositions that come from your observations?
Well, in a sense that they are intended to be so that we avoid any kind of hubris, thinking that we ever know the full picture of what's going on. It's supposed to be humbling in terms of the human condition. So we're going to act in the world, we're going to interact, converse with each other, but however much we think we understand the world around us, there's always more to it. There's always another level of detail we can get to. There's always another perspective, another viewpoint, even if it's someone else's and not ours. And at the end, of course, there's always error. I think Ranulph Danville will say, this side of eternity, there's always error.
Yes, and what is the purpose we have with all these laws? What do they do?
It helps you to understand the human situation with respect to our attempts to understand the world. So a long-winded way of saying that there's never going to be a theory of everything that as is being sought after by the physicists, or there's never going to be a clear picture of what needs to be done as sought after by a politician or a CEO of a company. These are all limits.
Are they, in a way, I go back to my point of conversations in the sense of interacting with other people. So on the whole, as you start saying, conversations in everyday life may approximate, and you follow from there. But the idea of conversation is one of the things that appears to me most significant and interesting in connection to your book.
Oh yes, conversation is central to it. The framework I'm operating in is roughly adumbrated by the term second-order cybernetics. The bigger picture, of course, here is that second-order cybernetics is part of a there's always more to it in terms of it's not just about conversation, it's about our understanding of the world around us as individuals. But of course, that gets us into the idea that we're always conversing with ourselves as we create these pictures. So it's the limits of being an observer, a second order observer included. And if we go down to another level of detail, the label second order cybernetics for me would include Matron's biology of cognition, von Foerster's concepts of observation and action, which I'm borrowing here, and also past conversation theory, and the various varieties. So there's detail there, and if I ask someone else to explain secondary to me, no doubt they'd come out with a different perspective and say it differently. And somewhere in there, if we carried on talking, we'd make errors. I'd misrepresent somebody I was talking to, us talking about, and so on. And if I talk, I may have a new idea. Someone else may have a new idea. Or maybe something else will happen that is unexpected. Suddenly there's a problem with the audio, for example. I wasn't expecting that. So it's about human beings situated somewhere and possibly conversing somewhere in a context which they're trying to understand.
Right, Jason.
Excuse me, I have a quick question or not. In number 4, how would you define the concept of error. And also, what's the distinction between number 4 and the number 5? I mean, is the error unexpected or expected? Or are they the same? Could you say more about the last two? Yeah.
Sorry, are you talking to me, Jason?
Yes, I think he's talking to you. Yes.
Okay, the sound is very, very, very muddled. Well, there's always error. It's a sense of cybernetics is about steering, trying to achieve some goal, and it's. I think that's where the error comes from. There that we get.
So you define error is some outcome versus expected. Can we say that? It's like you expect a certain value of a variable, and then you actually get a different value. So you call that an error. I mean, perhaps we need a better definition of what does this error mean. Yeah.
Well,
And so, Jason, perhaps what I would like to clarify is what is the purpose we have with these laws of observation and action? Because my general understanding of the book is that it is intended to improve the application, the use of cybernetics in social systems. And the idea of social systems implies that we are talking about interactions of people producing the social systems. So, in a way, I want to leave these laws as proposed by Bernard as something that perhaps would need to have further clarification. Just to give a meaning to what I'm saying, I'm going to use this thing. Here I have a conversation for action as proposed by Flores. So Flores, in his thesis and books and all of that, all the time is introducing the idea of conversations for action. And conversations for action go from A makes a request to B negotiates conditions of satisfaction, B performs directly or indirectly the request, and finally A the satisfaction. And this is something that he has produced in software and has been generated as a form of supporting people's interactions in a wide range of fashions. So, in a way, my real interest here is to see how Bernard's book can help to understand conversations for action, and therefore, beyond going through a wide range of concepts and ideas, is offering us ways of acting in the world and changing the situations in the world.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Raul. I mean, I'm familiar with the book by Flores and Vinograd, whatever it's called now. I can't remember the title of the book.
Understanding Computers and Cognition.
That's it. Well, I'm not sure what page it is, probably 25 or something like that. There's a footnote which says, to learn more about conversation theory, they give a reference to Gordon Pask. And I think they also give to learn more generally about what they're talking about, they give a reference to Maturana. So in a way, this is a simplification of past conversation theory. It all makes perfect sense, and it's very as an explanatory tool, their diagram. But A and B are situated. They're observing the situations they're in, and they're acting. So the laws of observation and action will work here. I mean, A makes a request to B. A and B negotiate conditions of satisfaction. Well, B will say, well, what are you talking about? And A will say, well, I'm talking about football. And B will say, well, are you talking about all football? Or are you distinguishing between soccer and so? Or are you only talking about the English league? I mean, this negotiating conditions of satisfaction is an attempt to narrow down the context for each other to come to some agreement. But at any point along the line where they think they understand each other, something may happen where they realize that one of them is thinking about who knows, Australian football, and the other one's thinking about Irish. It's somewhere along the line there'll be more misunderstandings with language after it. So they go round and round and round in circles. This is conversation. It goes on and on, just as we are doing at the moment. And I think I know what I'm talking about, but you don't understand me, and I don't understand why you don't understand me. And at the moment, I can't think of any better way to explain to you what I'm trying to get at than what I'm doing at the moment. And I don't seem to be getting anywhere. It's rather frustrating. And these are just, my laws are cautionary in the sense that it just warns us everything that we've got a clear picture of everything, and that everything is under control.
I think the point, Bernard, is the purpose, is the aim of your book to explain concepts, or is it to improve interactions and communications in social systems? So
I don't understand it.
Sorry.
Let me let you finish. Let me let you finish.
Go ahead.
No, both. I mean, I'm explaining concepts as I understand them, but I'm not doing it into a void. I'm for a readership who I assume have got some interest in cybernetics and possibly some interest in the social sciences, and wish to see what cybernetics offers. If you are a practicing social scientist, or if you are an armchair speculative thinker just wanting to understand how the world works, or what other people say about it. So it's quite open in that sense. It's not a closed theory of this is cybernetics and this is how you do it. Certainly, the heart of my thinking here is understanding what it is to be a human being in the world. As part of us, all that goes on in it. We are, I suppose, first of all, part of a social world, and it's helping people to understand the extent to which we are both products of the social world and creators of the social world. Which is again why I like to put the limits in there, caution limits of what we can do in our lives as social creatures. But I'm concerned with again, it's second order cybernetics concepts of responsibility, knowing that we are observers who are constructing our understandings of the world around us and then acting in that world, that we should take responsibility for our actions as best we can. And somewhere in it, I probably quote one verse who says, act towards the future you desire. So we're continually, as I see it, whether our desires change from moment to moment or not, which they often do, we're continually in the game of being cyberneticians. We are actively in action. We are steering the ship. We're trying to achieve goals. We're encountering error. We're encountering the unexpected, and we're responding accordingly. But just to be alive is to be like a ship at sea trying to get somewhere, and the least thing we can be trying to aim to do is to stay afloat. So it's it's a kind of whole cybernetic feel or thesis about being alive as a human being. It's hard to understand how anyone could begin an explanation of what it is to be a human, a living system in this world without employing cybernetic concepts, which are all the time without realizing they're doing cybernetics. So part of the exercise is to clarify that there is such a thing as cybernetics, which I consider incredibly important as an invention, if you like, the very invention that there is such a thing as an overall science of organization, control and communication, and then to realize that we're it all the time. We're always acting cybernetically or doing our best to in a world which is essentially cybernetic in its organization and its behavior. So
now, can I stop you there, Bernard?
Yes, of course.
Now, the question is, does the book offer directions into understanding the world in this cybernetic fashion that you have described? Does it help to run projects and activities in education, health, or whatever, so that we understand on the end what the basic ideas are, but most importantly, are we engaged in conversations for action so that we can improve the performance of these systems? Is that something that the book covers or not?
Well, yes, implicitly. It's only 50,000 words. There's not a lot I can say in there. I mean, my own writings I've written about using cybernetics, social cybernetics to improve how institutions work and to understand how they work. And these are there. And I'll give references to some of this other work. The most direct, I suppose, the most direct thing I do with respect to institutions is make a reference to Stafford Beer and the VSM, but it's barely a footnote. I mean, there's just not space to dwell on the particulars of applications of cybernetics. I mean, once we start looking at applications, they're everywhere, and interest in institutions is one thing. I'm interested in governance, as carried out by governments, is another thing, and interest in such things as family life, health, well-being, educational processes. I mean, these you get into another level of detail beyond what's happening within the institution as an institution. So, mind you, the word institution is again problematic in that we may have different things in mind. I generally follow Elliot Jackson. He makes a distinction between sort of management hierarchy kind of organizations, which is the classic business organization where you have a managing director and you have employees and you have a board of shareholders, no, board of directors or whatever, and other kinds of organization which function differently. And they're all institutions of one kind or another. And people refer to the family as an institution, but it doesn't map onto the model of a.
So according, I understand what you mean there, but the question is, since we are only in parts 1 and 2 of the book, as we move ahead into the other parts of the book, are we going to understand how to apply these concepts to different institutions and how to make things happen in the world?
Well, I hope so. I mean, certainly that's what cybernetics did for me. In a sense, it woke me up. You know, as a young man, I might have formulated certain insights and understandings in different ways, other than cybernetically, the concepts and terminology of cybernetics. In fact, I did sample a lot more other worldviews in my maturation. I mean, one of them, as I say, I already mentioned Elliot Jack's work, which is you can cast it as a cybernetic theory of management. I also read a lot of Confucius, which has a lot to say about statesmanship and how to be a responsible citizen and scholar within a society. I mean, all these are sources as I was growing up and learning as an undergraduate and postgraduate, helped me understand how the world works. And certainly I adopted cybernetics as the kind of umbrella framework in which I can fit the other ones. And there's a very nice statement from, I forgot his name, George Kelly, who invented repertory grids. George Kelly, the psychotherapist, is classified as a constructivist in that we all construe the world in our own personal ways, using our personal constructs or concepts. And he says that there's a sense in which all human beings are, he uses the phrase man as scientist, whether we realize it or not, as we stumble about in the world, making mistakes, learning lessons, using reason and evidence as best we can. All of us are, to some extent, behaving like scientists, although not as precisely and with the awareness of our methods as a trained scientist might. So in the same sense, everyone's stumbling around cybernetically, trying to do things, trying to achieve things, but often doing them in effective ways. But they're still having a go at solving the problems or getting the goals. So cybernetics can provide you with much more, with handy tools for understanding what's happening around you, with such simple things as the law of requisite variety, indeed, as my cautionary laws, which are, there's always a big picture.
As perhaps you can see in the screen, I have now put a slide with complexity and Ashby's law of requisite variety.
Yes.
And I am transcribing a paragraph from part 2 of your book. So you say Ashby's law of requisite variety, only variety can destroy variety, makes clear in the simplest terms that if a system is to survive in a changing environment, it must manage the variety that it faces. It must learn to identify and minimize unnecessary constraints on its actions. For humans, this applies not only to the first order variety to be found in our environmental niches, but also to the second order bewildering, wicked complexity of variety to be found in our belief systems and in our perceptions and meta-perceptions of each other. And you say you have written about this elsewhere. The question is, does this help us to change situations in institutions, in organizations, in social systems? Does the law of requisite variety, as expressed by you or developed furthermore in the book, help to apply this law in practice?
Oh yes, that's the intention here. What I have in mind what I have in mind at the moment is the rather big picture of what's happening to us as a species. It says here, if a system, that's the human species, is to survive in a changing environment, it must manage the variety that it faces. We've got enormous variety going on around us in both the world of observables, in the sense of the physical world or nature, and also the second order world of social interaction. And we've got, some of us have managed to fully appreciate that we are in the process of destroying our world, the biosphere as it exists to support us. Now, it says here we must learn to manage that variety. I mean, first problem is to recognise that these are constraints on what may be done. We've been, without constraint, using fossil fuels, and now we're facing the consequences. So we have to apply certain constraints, which are being lawfully expressed in our experiences. There are laws of how the world works, nature works, if you like, which we are having to learn and to a great level of detail now to manage the variety that we face. So, I mean, in no time at all, we'll have no more fossil fuels being burnt or being used, but a bit later in the day. But we'll be learning the lawfulness of the world. But the other side of the coin is that we have to identify and minimize unnecessary constraints on our actions. I mean, people are forever, following habits and attitudes and laws which aren't necessary. As I understand it from Wilkes, for example, who's a kind of management consultant guru. I don't know if you know of him at all.
Mm-hmm.
But he said one of the first things to do when he looks at an organisation and they say they have a problem is to look for what if there are unnecessary constraints. And what I have in mind here is that constraints which aren't necessary constrain the variety of possible action and possible human interaction. For example, if you dress women in black garments with hoods on their heads and things like that, then they are constrained from interacting in various ways with other members of the human species. For an army, it's a good idea to put people in uniform because you want them to behave in a constrained manner, as an army with a definite purpose, a shared purpose. But in normal human interaction, we need the variety that comes from creativity and invention, new ideas, and these come from humans interacting with each other freely and liberally, as it were. So there are unnecessary constraints out there. I was educated in a boys' school. For some reason, we weren't permitted, we weren't educated alongside the girls. That's something I remember very well. I mean, the constraints was justified in certain ways, but in other ways, you could say it wasn't. It was an unnecessary constraint. So
tell me one thing. I'm trying to understand the book as a whole,
mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to understand whether through the book you provide some methodological directions to make use of this law in ways that really we can recognize constraint and we can produce action and all of that in ways that improve social systems through a better cybernetics.
Well, I mentioned again, it's a small book, and I mentioned certain things, but one of the central things is for us as cyberneticians is to be aware of what we're doing and take responsibility for what we're doing in the world. And I see this as a generalization of anybody on the planet wishing to be, I could say enlightened, but I could also say wise, and to take responsibility for understanding what is happening in the world. So there are these excitations in the final chapter about being a responsible, ethical observer. And the first step towards that is the awareness that we are here now responsible for what's happening around us and in the world, including right now in our conversation with each other. another thing I touch on in the book is education, and I see it as a great realm in which education in the broadest sense of helping the next generation, indeed the existing generations, to come to understand how the world works and what it means to be a human being. And for that to be the case, then from very onwards, we can help young people understand that we are part of a species and dependent on each other. And that, for example,
how do you know who are the people that you recognize as we are the species? How do we know who they are?
Well, the usual definition of a species is that they are creatures that can mate, sexual reproduction.
Yeah.
That puts the boundary around a species. That's just classic biology. There are the odd cases of horses and donkeys.
Bernard, what I am trying to, the direction I'm trying to go, is how do we provide some directions in social systems through the concepts and ideas that we have been discussing here, so that people improve their performance in these organizations. Just to give you this thing that I have here, which you know very well, so there is nothing particularly new in there, is something that is an expression of the law of requisite variety, as discussed and developed by Howard and myself in 1982. And here you can see that we have several fundamental concepts that are central to the way we perform in society. So we have the concept of a black box, you have regulators, you have desirable states which support what kind of performance do we want, and then we have processes of inquiry which are models of the black box, and they connect to affordances and changes to controllable resources, so that we respond to environmental disturbances. Now, this model, personally, I have used it extensively to improve performance in organizations of all kinds. Is this something that could be of any value in the context of your book?
Well, in the context of my book, Raul, this is an example of a feedback of a system that's being using control by use of negative feedback. I mean, I don't see anything in there that is new or different. It's expressed in terms which should hopefully be understood by someone working in a particular encounter cybernetics. And I congratulate you on your success in using that diagram. But in the larger context of cybernetics, it's relatively trivial. Not to say it isn't helpful.
The fact is,
I mean, part 4 of my book, I set out basic concepts of control and regulation, of that kind of analysis of how a system works and how you might. So I don't see that.
The key thing of this diagram, is that the variety of the outputs of the system have to be lower or equal than the variety of the desirable states. And that is something that constantly is not being pursued in our social systems. Social systems constantly produce outputs that are larger than the desirable states, and therefore the system doesn't perform. And that is happening all the time. And I'm wondering, to what extent is that something that you are recognizing in the book?
Well, you're talking about you're talking about management of variety, and that's, I mean, you've already just quoted that part from Ashby. I mean, in my 50,000 words, what else do I say? If you've got too much
What you
variety.
can say is that in those situations, social systems that you have been encountering through your work and many others' works, it is very common that the variety of the outputs is larger than the variety of the desirable states, and therefore we operate in a system that is not controlling its environment, is not managing
Sorry,
properly.
Raul, but this. If we look at our education system, okay, we have certain desirable states that we would like to have, in which, for example, all children who have got the intellectual ability to do so learn to read and write and communicate in express ways. Now, at the moment, the outputs of that educational system is such that there's a wide variety of outputs. Only a certain proportion of the children attain their potential, and there are still children leaving school at 16 years of age with a reading age of 8 years old if they're lucky, 8.5. So certainly you see undesirable outputs, and you use your measurements to hopefully improve what happens later. I can't see the regulator seems to be unconnected to it. The regulator here doesn't seem to have any input in your diagram. But this is continuing.
The regulator is the one who is working out the desirable states.
Well, yes. Where's the regulator getting the information from? Oh, the regulator. Well, it's obviously basing on some model, some assumptions, some data about what's happening in the environment. So anyway, that doesn't matter. There's a connection. I'll give you a very concrete example. When I worked as an educational psychologist, I worked for two different educational authorities. One of them had it was a county at the time. It was a county-wide screening system where at the age of 7+, all children were given some simple assessments, testing. And that was a very useful filter to identify children with serious educational needs, and also other children who were falling behind for variety of other reasons. And it was very effective. Those are very effective filters to allow us to get on and work in appropriate ways with children to meet their individual needs. Now, I then went to work for a different educational authority, and they had a policy, a politically correct, of no testing. And I discovered that there were children at the ages of 7, 8 who were not being identified as having special needs. And there were a whole mass of children who were going from the first school to middle school stage who had serious reading problems because they weren't being assessed. Oh, no, we don't do testing. Now, thankfully, a few years later, the government brought in national testing. And so that gap in that particular authority system was filled. But this was ideology, driven, creating a system that was patently failing, but they weren't using any means to identify the failures. So this is, as I say, sort of obvious to me that you need information about what you need, design states, and you need information about what's going wrong.
Right. Let me just add something. Complexity and structural recursion. Maturana thinks that notions such as complexity and chaos are evocative metaphors for the reflections of an observer, and argues that they do not reveal the processes involved in the constitution of a system. While for a molecule that might be the case, it is not the case for social systems. For a social system, structural recursion is replicating its structure within the contained autonomous units. So what I am trying to get an insight from you is the notions of complexity and chaos that are used by Maturana in his writings are used as evocative metaphors and not as quantitative aspects that can somehow help to observe better and to reflect better about a situation that is relevant to us. This is particularly relevant for social systems. For the case of molecules and so on, it may well be that that is not such a relevant thing. But for social systems, it is very, very important that we know how to model complexity and we know how to make use of it so that situations are better managed and controlled in our societies. Is that something that makes sense to you?
Well, I'm trying to make sense of what you've written. But this is your words, you're quoting Maturana.
That's it.
And
That's correct. That's correct.
Concrete and social.
Maturana.
Raul, just let me say, Maturana talks about evocative metaphors. And there's a bigger picture of our use of language, and we can say, well, everything in some ways is metaphorical. So if I look at your second, the couple of sentences at the bottom, this is necessary to understand relationships and concrete transformations in social systems. Well, I don't know what a concrete transformation is in a social system. That's a metaphor, and I'm not sure how it's intended. But back to
it's intended as a performance.
Well, it's a metaphor. It's a measure. It's something that's been hopefully if it's you mean it's observable, something that's measurable.
That they happen according to some performance criteria.
Well, if you've got some performance criteria, then you're doing some measuring.
That's the idea.
And you're the observer. You've defined the system.
But that's exactly where some kind of methodological help is necessary, because not me, it's the actual relevant viewpoint who is going to observe that.
Yeah, well, but this is where we get into immediate problem with social systems is that everyone is an observer. Everyone has a perspective.
In a social system, it has a perspective and is an observer in that social system. So I am not an observer of, for instance, the way that your town is run. That is part of, that's something that goes totally beyond me.
So you're not an observer of what?
Way in which a town like the one you live in performs and runs its own activities.
Well, everyone in this town has their own perspective on how the town works, who is important, what's important, and so on.
Right.
It's
I'm talking about me, not about the people who live in your town.
well, okay. Well, you probably have you will have, if you visited the town, you immediately have some ideas about it. But so I'm not sure the point here. The point I'm making is that if someone's going to distinguish a system and measure aspects of it, they're going to be doing, if it's a social system, they're going to be in a context where the social system consists of other observing systems, other human beings, all of whom will have their own perspective. So, in the context of cybernetics and socio-cybernetics in particular, as I understand it, we're talking about participatory action research, where you engage with the members of the social system, all the stakeholders, and engage in the conversations which people are given the opportunity to learn and to contribute their understandings, and together as a composite of observing consultants, observing managers, and observing participants, come to some satisfactory conclusions about a way ahead. And if it's done well, the participatory observers who've gone in there with their relatively sophisticated knowledge of how social systems work and can be transformed in healthy ways will have sowed the seeds of their understandings and practice within the local community, so that the local community from then on can autonomously manage itself better than it was before the participatory observers got involved. I mean, roughly, that's how I understand management consultancy. Whether it's whether it's trying to improve the performance of a business organisation or social relations within a community, or helping make decisions about local resources and so on, how they're managed and used. These are all participatory activities. And yes, a change agent of some kind, a consultant or a researcher who's doing participatory research, can help bring about the good. But he or she must must understand that they're learning all the time about the system, and as they go, their understanding of the system will change, as will the system's understanding of their behaviour change. It's all interactive and conversational, and has to be managed with these. I don't know what you call them. They are recursions of observing the observer.
Right. One thing is recursions of observing the observer. There is another thing which is structural recursion. Do you recognize structural recursion?
I'm not familiar with that term. I use it because you say for a social system.
Yes, indeed. I am using that for a social system.
So what is a structural recursion? What do you mean by structural recursion?
I mean that there are autonomous units within autonomous units within autonomous units, all of them sharing the same structure.
Oh, okay. Well, it's same. You don't mean identical here. You mean similar in some respect.
No, they're in terms of the structural recursion. If we use the viable system model, it means exactly the same model, the same viable system model that replicates at all structures.
Well, yes, but the form of the model remains the same in the structural recursion, but the particularities of any instance of it will have its own particular values, its own identity.
No doubt.
As an autonomous, which may or may not be functioning well.
But the problem is that you may not have autonomy if certain structural conditions are not accepted or not followed.
Yeah, well, you've got me here, because you're using the word autonomous as if we both understand what we mean by it. And in this context, I don't understand, because in the recursive structuring of social systems, as I understand it, then there'll be higher level systems for which which are have some kind of control and management responsibility for lower level systems. And I don't usually use the term, but you could say that the structure is a system of holons, in the sense of whoever it was who came up with that term, where there is a certain amount of autonomy. As I sit here, I'm an autonomous within a social system, and I have a certain amount of autonomy. I can get in my car and I can drive down the road, and I can down and go shopping. However, I am constrained by the rules of the system of which I'm a part to have to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Otherwise, I'm breaking the law, and I'm a danger to myself and other people on the road. So, autonomy is relative to the particular context in which we find ourselves, or a particular unit finds itself. So it's, in Matriana's term, autopoietic from some perspectives and allopoietic from others. So yes.
Yeah, I think clearly the I'm trying to clarify is whether in the development of the argument in your book, this management of complexity through structural recursion takes place or is considered, and from what you have said, it doesn't look like.
Well, I think I do. I use the term recursion. I mean, I refer to.
You use recursive
structures
for conversations.
Well. I was just avoiding saying that, because at the moment, my autonomy in my version of second order assignment, or past version of second order assignments, the autonomous units or the units are conversations. I mean, I'm having a conversation with myself. I happen to be embodied in one body. You and I are having a conversation together, so that's another level. We've gone up structure, we've recursed upwards, if you like, and we happen to be embodied in two bodies. And we can structure recurse up to whoever's still part of this conversation. I can see Jason is still here. Everyone else seems to have gone, and we can go up from that to whatever, the Club of Remy, the discipline of Cybernetics, and so on. So this notion of recursive structuring, I'm not happy about the word structure, but recursively organized or whatever, is fine. It's in the book there somewhere. It's part of, it's one of the fundamental. In fact, in the prologue, I begin by introducing the idea of recursion in an informal way, because I'm aware. Well, part of my readership that I'm aiming at, Raul, are the social scientists who have not encountered cybernetics head on, as it were, and have very limited understanding of what it offers. I'm, as advanced organisers in my account, I introduce certain concepts to do with control and communication and recursion, and the notion of recursions of awareness, observing the observer and so on, right at the outset as a kind of preliminary frame, which is filled in with more detail as one works through the book. But the book isn't not a linear exposition. It has to refer back to itself several times. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I just wonder whether Jason has some questions at this point, or because I want to into a different sort of argument now. Jason, have we lost you?
You're muted, Jason.
So, yeah, I said I have no extra questions. Please go on as you plan.
Any comment, Jason?
No, I said I have no further questions. Please go on as your plan.
Right. Anybody else wants to add a comment so that we can somehow include others?
Well, I don't think anyone else is here.
I can see that there are other people around.
Oh, okay.
Or just made a comment in the chat box. He has to leave, but he was saying that maybe your question is maybe you're asking volume 2.
Yeah, well, that's something that perhaps is a conclusion to come up afterwards once all the debates and discussions around the book take place.
I'm sorry, what's being said, Jason? Are you saying we're coming to the end of this meeting?
No. I was saying Paul Pangaro has to leave early. He said something in the chat box. Let me read. He said, Raul, you seem to want something from Bernard's book that he says is beyond scope. It is a small book, and he has provided, in my opinion, very valuable introductory and authoritative materials. That was his intent. Perhaps you asked for volume 2. He said that.
That's where I answered that. However, I just, if you allow me, Jason, I want to proceed now to what time are you planning to finish this conversation?
We usually have 2-hour sessions, so you still have 48 minutes if you like.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, so what I want to do now is move in the direction of about the parts 1 and 2 of the book, and as I'm saying, there is about first publication and the first look at aspects like aims, what is cybernetics, how the publication is structured is in part 1, and in part 2 we have a more autobiographical presentation of Bernard in terms of his work over 50 years. So I'm going to say a few things here. From what I could read in the abstract, this publication meets a long-felt need to show the relevance of cybernetics for the social sciences. User-friendly descriptions of the core concepts of cybernetics are provided, with examples of how they can be used in the social sciences. It is explained how cybernetics functions as a transdiscipline that unifies other disciplines and a meta-discipline that provides insights about how other disciplines function. An account of how cybernetics emerged as a distinct field is provided, providing interdisciplinary meetings in the 1940s convened to explore feedbacks and circular causality in biology and social systems. How encountering cybernetics transformed the author's thinking and his understanding of life in general. That is recounted in the book. That's what Bernard offers as the abstract to the book. Is that okay, Bernard? Do you want to explain?
Yes, that's fine. I can't remember if that's all me who wrote that. Probably possibly is.
I don't think I added anything or took a thing. Perhaps I only put explore feedback and circular causality in biology and social systems.
Well, those are the Macy conferences.
Yes, that's the Macy conference. And then you talk about the embodiment and construction of reality. Our thoughts processes are embodied. The cybernetician is part of this theory, He explains himself to himself as a system of thought, a narrative that reproduces itself as a stable but ever-changing self-conscious self embodied in a brain body system that constantly reproduces and renews itself. And finally, whereas the physicist believes that he's discovering reality, the cybernetician knows he's constructing a reality. Can you give some comments about this?
Well, I mean, sorry. I mean, these we're talking as cyberneticians about my book, which is aimed at social scientists who are not familiar with the general tenets of cybernetics. So this is the topic of how the cybernetics construes itself as embodied observers in converse. I put it simply like that. That's how cybernetics sees us. We see ourselves in the world. Is completely different epistemologically from the physicist who, as an observing system, stands outside or distinguishes an objective reality that he is then going to investigate and discover more about. So there's a reality outside of the physicist. He stands outside it and then engages with it to learn about it.
First order cybernetics as opposed to second order cybernetics?
No. First order cybernetics is observed systems. It doesn't. You cannot, as cyberneticians, we cannot do first order without also doing second order because we are the ones observing the observed systems. We cannot absent ourselves from the picture. Whether the physicists they do this discovery or investigation of the reality, and then they absent themselves from the picture. They do not exist within the theories that they come up with. They've stepped back, and they're not taking responsibility. Some do, obviously, but the basis of epistemological stance is that there is an objective reality that they are investigating and learning about, as observers, they are not part of that reality.
Okay, yes, I take very clearly that point. But in terms of processes, our thought processes are embodied. How does that happen?
Well, there you go. We've got from the beginning of time when human beings, or at least the time when human beings started to reason, they made various distinctions between their thought about the world around them and the bodies that they appear to be their vehicles in which they kind of operate, as it were, and various distinctions. So however it's expressed, the distinction between.
Are you suggesting that embodiment is something that happens as a matter of course in our own lives as we participate in social systems?
Well, Sorry, not sure what you mean. I mean, embodied just means that we are, there is a brain-body system which we can observe as a, if you like, a first-order system, but we can observe as a sort of physically distinguishable system, and human beings that we think. So we cannot separate our thinking from our embodiment. I mean, it's sorry, again, it's just such a sort of. I suppose it's called the interactionist version of the mind body or mind brain problem, and it's probably first clearly articulated by C.S. Peirce and William James. That for every change in thought is accompanied is embodied by a change in the brain body system. They're not that as a distinguished from Cartesian dualism, where the mind is a different kind of substance from the body, and there's some strange interaction via the pineal gland or not, depending on which version you believe. But the point made here is that there is no mind-like entity floating around without a body, and there's no sort of active body.
Would the concept of emergence better than embodiment?
Sorry, I can't hear you, Jason.
I'm asking, would the concept of emergence better than emergence?
Well, that's part of
better than embodiment here.
Oh, emergent. Oh, well.
Through a self-organizing processes of the neural network. Emerge.
Yeah, but we're talking. If we start talking about emergence, then we're back into something else which I introduced in the very first part of the book. Prolegomena is the is a rather relatively standard narrative about the second law of thermodynamics and the emergence of structure in the cosmos at all. And cosmos means ordered rather than chaos. But the fact that there are structures out there, they're all emergence. And what you have in this context is, yes, the emergence of living systems and the evolution. It's not just emergence, it's an evolutionary process which bring us about as bodies, but also all the cultural processes which emerge, by which we as persons, embodied persons.
Perhaps, Bernard, what I am very much interested is the embodiment of social systems. Does that make sense to you? That we are talking about embodied and disembodied social systems?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, again, it's down to what distinctions you are choosing to make as an observer of what you are referring to as a social system. Now, my view is that the social is, well, it's not such a simple story, but there is, I suppose it is a simple story, is that the social is always embodied. And if there's no embodiment, then there's no social system. So that's it, really.
Do you accept that there are social systems that are weakly embodied and that they don't have proper structures to perform whatever functions they may need to perform?
Well, again, that's how you might distinguish a system that way and say that's the case. We have some kind of loose collective of town councillors or thieves who have certain ways in which they are behaving as a collective, as a social system, and other ways in which they are not, or they're only loosely. You might then say, well, look, there's a family, and they are very, very connected. So they are, bound by their embodiment into being this collective system. So you can make all sorts of distinctions, but it depends on your purposes. And the main distinction I tend to emphasise is the one of I was using conversation theory, the idea of the psychosocial unity, where the members of that collective, that unity, distinguish themselves as such. So, family members distinguish themselves as family members, and members of a trades union distinguish themselves as members of the trades union.
But what would it mean to have a embodied social system?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. That's your term, weakly embodied. What do you mean?
I mean that simply the identity of the group or the system is not clear. That they don't have resources to do the things that they want to do. These are all aspects that relate to somehow structure, and they provide directions for improving the way the system works.
Well, give me an example, Raul. I'm not sure what you say. What kind of system you're distinguishing here? We have one extreme. Anyway, I've given you some examples. But please provide an example of what you're thinking about.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of a system which you could call a family system, where you have many people contributing to a family, and they are behaving very much in their own way without really getting involved in creating something that is a family in its own right. So that implies that the embodiment of the family is weak, in my words.
Okay, well, you're distinguishing different types of family here, ones which are closely intimate and coherent in their ideas, their views, and their behaviours, and ones which aren't. I mean, both kinds of family, at whatever extreme you want to place them on your measuring stick, are embodied. They're still embodied.
But they may be operating as independent units, fragmented units, and not as embodied units.
Well, they all have. We've already agreed that these units have certain degrees of autonomy, and there's a distinction to be made between cases where someone chooses to give up their autonomy to be closely aligned with the goals or behaviours of a particular collective, and other cases where they've been constrained, they've been recruited into that collective, whether they like it or not. So there are a variety. One example I have is the military. I mean, the military recruits one way, its membership, sometimes by what's the word for it? Conscription, sometimes by members volunteering, and then having become part of that collective, that social system, they have to conform with its norms, its normative behaviours, its habits, its rules, very, very. In other cases, such constraints are not the case. If there's a cybernetic thought here, it's that whatever constraints exist and are shared should be relevant for the viability of the system, for the health of the system. There are reasons why armies are constrained. It's for the efficiency with which one can make warfare, or the generals can. And the reason why we should have, I said earlier, in other settings, particularly perhaps in the family as an example, we should only impose constraints which are for the good, as it were, which maintain harmony and allow people. Well, there's a phrase used in child development which says, it's healthy for the child to have boundaries and to know where they are, but within those boundaries, the child is free to behave. It has autonomy. So there are some families where the children are, seen and not heard. It's very hard disciplinary approaches to raising family, and others where there's no rules at all, and the children go off the rails, as it were. They become monsters inside the family and outside the family. So again, they're all embodied.
Using your example, one point is that some members of the military may be fragmented and not operating as a whole in the context of the military system. And the result of that is that the embodiment of the military system is restricted to those who accept the rules, while at the same time there are many others who are not accepting and therefore are behaving as part of perhaps a different system.
Well, in that case, the military system, which is trying to function as a military system, would identify the miscreants and possibly shoot them or lock them up. I don't know. I mean, the system.
This relates back to our conversation earlier, where the idea of a system and performance is related to autonomy and is related to structure. And that's one of the points that I was asking you, the extent to which these kind of questions would emerge in the book or are basically not considered.
Yeah, well, either in the book or right associated to. I can't remember if in the book I quote the principles of war or not, but it's what I frequently do. I mean, I worked in a military academy for several years and became quite familiar with British military doctrine. Part of my job as an educational technologist was to give advice on how to deliver this, massive information about the military to young officers out in the field. So various forms of distance learning were tried, and I was kind of the mastermind with respect to the educational design, the instructional design. But I learned a lot, and the number one principle of war, back to Chinese days, is establish and maintain the aim. Establishment of an aim and then maintaining the aim. Now this is clearly cybernetic. You decide what your goal is, your aim is, and then you actively, consciously work to maintain the aim. You don't allow for mission drift. You don't allow other people to wander off doing their own thing. You're all united, which is to prosecute some kind of war against the enemy. And so a lot of the doctrine is about ensuring that the collective that is the army are working as one, with respect to the overall aim within any particular conflict or setting.
Right. Now, let me just bring the conversation to the notion of purpose that you were talking about, aims and goals. I think one of the, as you refer to in the book, you say the story of cybernetics has several possible beginnings. One common starting point is the publication in 1943 of the paper Behavior, Purpose and Teleology by Arturo Rosenbluth, Norbert Wiener, and William Bigelow, and the associated discussions which led up to the Macy conferences on feedback and circular causality in biology and social systems. Right. The question that I have in my mind here is this idea of constructing purpose. Mhm. How do you proceed with the notion of purpose within a social system?
Well, we're back to, social systems are like you and I. We are human beings, and we set our purposes. We create our purposes. We adopt our purposes. The purpose at the moment is for, as I understand it, is for as a resource in developing your understanding of what my book's about. And I in return, are using you as a resource to help me understand what you understand about my book and what else you understand that I might find very interesting or useful for my overall understanding of cybernetics. And that's how the conversation's going. So we have purposes here within the broad purpose of the Club of Remy. So having a conversation for a purpose, I believe.
So let me just put one example. If you are talking about a company, an organization, what is the purpose of the company?
Well, again, it's down to definitions and who's looking at what. I mean, Stafford tells us, the purpose of a system is what it does.
Yeah, but I don't go along with that. So I'm trying to work out in more precise terms.
What don't you go along with? I thought it's one of the basics of management consultancy. Is for the system itself, the organisation, to realise that it needs to look at whatever it says its purpose is, whatever it says its aim is, that it should look to see what it's actually doing. A big example which came up just a few months ago in a conversation organised by the UK Cybernetics Society was a chap who gave a talk about how can cybernetics help the Church of England? And I had to point out to him, well, the system is what it does. The system at the moment, whilst whatever else is happening with the system, is diminishing in size in terms of its membership. But what it is doing is maintaining a priestly hierarchy and its material resources. So, the system is conserving itself in terms of a priestly hierarchy earning salaries and all the resources of the land and the church buildings that it owns. It's doing that. Meanwhile, it's losing its membership. So the idea that the Church of England is here to spread the gospel or help people understand the gospel is completely lost. And, the system is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And this is, I understand it, is one of the main ways you can go into a system and engage in conversations which help management, whoever in the system, understand how they're not doing what they think they're doing.
Right. Let's say, as we know, any organization like the church and so on has many participants, and each of these participants have their own views and their own understanding according to their own history of what they are doing. So it is not necessarily the case that all of them will share this, will think that they are doing the same thing. The likelihood is that they are not going to think that they are doing the same thing, and therefore the purpose of that church is a variety of positions that people are expressing in their day-to-day operations. So is that something you share, or is it not?
Well, I mean, that's the case if you're looking at the particular participants. I mean, you've got different kinds of members. You've got the priestly hierarchy, who are employed or paid by the organization, and you've got the participants who one way or the lay people who are members of it. Now, within all that, there are documents, there are texts, there are coded information which states what the church's mission is and how the church should function. So it's true that in any organization, how spelled out the rules are, for example, the army, individuals will have different or slightly different or very different views of the purpose of the system and what it's about. The big examples I came across when I've been investigating social systems all my life. I mean, I do just without thinking about it. But one of the big first ones I did was involved an organisation, Fabrics. It still exists in West London, and I discovered that everybody on the factory floor, who were workers, was engaged in some kind of fiddle. They were all abusing the bonus system which the management had introduced. They were all abusing the bonus system to maximise their returns with a minimum effort. And when I spoke to the management, the managers, they said, "Oh no, there's no fiddling. None of that happens in our organisation. There was a case a couple of years ago, but he was dismissed." So there was a kind of blindness within the organisation at the managerial level to what was happening at the factory floor level. Now, there's a certain sense where you say, well, really, you've got two different systems opposing each other, but within a larger framework. It was interesting, but it was complicated. And the workers justified their behaviour in various ways, saying, well, they don't pay us enough. So, or, don't give a mug an even chance. If the management is silly enough to give us a bonus system that's got flaws in it, we'll exploit them. So it was, it's an odd sense in which you've got the overall autonomy of the organisation, and within it you've got different behaviours, different viewpoints expressed by different individuals, depending on their values and their positions, and so on.
So if you had to define the purpose of that organization you have just described, you would say it is an organization to fiddle the operations and help the workers to get their own rewards independent of what the company is claiming it is doing.
But some of the things it was doing. I mean, the company was viable. It was making a profit. The workers were producing the goods as required, but they were exploiting this system of financial rewards, the bonuses, and the management were claimed to be oblivious to this going on.
So, but you would say that the purpose of the system is what a collective of its members are agreeing to do as a collective, and not as they are expressing in their mission statement or any other document.
Yes. The purpose of the system in that particular context is to give permission, but to enable workers to maximize their incomes.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because the purpose of that system is to maximize the incomes and not to produce
No, I said in that context, one particular. I mean, it's Stafford's phrase. The purpose of the system is what, or the goal of the system, synonyms, is what it does. And yes, it produces fabric, and yes, it gets an income from the customers who pay for these fabrics, and so on. There's all the mechanisms of an organisation working, but within that organisation, there's a distinct. There's different perspectives from management and workers about how the system actually works.
So what it does is different participants.
Well, they've got different perspectives. I say there's always a bigger picture.
But for people on the shop floor, they will say the purpose of the organization is to maximize the income of the workers there. And for the managers of that organization, they will say the purpose of the company is producing whatever product is.
Yeah, what the system was doing with respect to the workforce was enabling them to, what's the word? I'm not sure the word. Well, fiddle was the word. Fiddle the system to engage in selfish behaviours, and in doing so, become they were alienated from the system. So the system was maintaining. Part of the purpose of the system is to maintain an alienation between management and workers.
So at the end of the day, the purpose is to maintain the alienation between management and workers.
Well,
Not to
that's
produce.
what it was doing.
Yeah.
It was doing both, Raul. It's not an either or.
Well, the point is that if we say the purpose of the system is what it does, we are accepting that there is one doing that is what the purpose, what defines the purpose. On the other hand, recognizing here is that there are different purposes.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, any organisation does more than one thing. Now, the church example, I quoted the example that it maintains the priestly hierarchy, keeps all these priests best it can, and it looks after its capital. Now, it could sell off the capital, but it doesn't. It maintains it. It could give it all to the poor, but it doesn't. It maintains it. So, I mean, it's not. Systems are real when you get in there, in the sense that everybody's living a particular reality, and one needs to accept that that's what they are doing. You can see how the system as a whole has more than one thing happening inside it. I mean, these are the interesting parts of investigating organizations, institutions. It's still, all this concept was introduced to me in my first year as an undergraduate in psychology, talking about the culture of the factory floor. The fact that you could see within an organization distinct cultures, distinct ways of behaving and looking at the world within an organization. But if the organization is overall viable, then the different cultures are being sustained. Now, one could say some cultures are pathological and that they are in some ways undermining the viability of the system. Healthy. So, it's. I'm trying to think if I met any of the workers in this particular factory who, on grounds of principle, did not abuse the bonus system. I didn't.
What I'm wondering is that in the development of the theme of your book, the idea of purpose is well described and discussed, so that different views, different embodiments, different conversations are involved in creating these purposes.
Well, in the book, I use goal, purpose, and aim as synonyms. I believe I say that is the case. We're talking about a book about cybernetics, and cybernetics is about feedback and circular causality in social systems. It's about systems which are designed to achieve goals, to go somewhere, maintain something, create something.
The really interesting point is, yes, they are intended to achieve goals, but since there are different viewpoints, different people involved, they will all produce or push for their own views, their own purposes, and at the end of the day, I'm wondering which one is what we could consider to be the purpose of the system.
Well, you're the observer. I'm the observer. I look at the system and I decide for myself. I say, on the basis of the evidence I've gathered so far, this is the purpose of the system. This is what the system is doing. I mean, I don't see any quarrel. I don't understand what you're questioning here, Raul.
The only thing I'm saying is that since there are many viewpoints, and I already mentioned the notion of fragmentation and all of that, it is
we dealt with that.
Perfectly possible that the ways they structure what the organization does are different, and as a result of that, you need to work out better ways to bring together the different viewpoints so that they can understand better what they are doing together, not as
yes. I mean, these are, sorry, Raul, these are cliches of organizational psychology. I don't understand.
They are more than cliches of organizational psychology, because I can show you that in structural terms, I can build up interactions in an organization so that increases the chances that people will.
Well, with all respect, Raul, so can I. I mean, this is what one thing inside an organization. If you've been asked to improve how the system is working, there are things you can do within it which will bring those improvements about. You may say, well, this is a particular model I'm using. This is my particular process. You know, this is how I understand things. But the aim is the same: is to bring about improvements, better understandings. And often the simplest thing is just to open up channels of communication.
And balancing the interactions between these participants so that they don't run away with their pet ideas, and they have some connections that help to produce a more articulated view.
Yes, I say this is, you know, the factory I worked in was my first example of working institution. The second one was working in a hospital as part of a very large project of what's the word? Change management, action research. I worked under the direction of a man called Reginald Revens, who was a pioneer of it. You know of him?
Yes, of course.
Well, I worked on that project in a hospital, and he had a large program operating in 10 different London hospitals, where the basic idea was that senior management would be trained in some aspects of social science or organizational psychology, whatever you want to call it, management science, and would go in and investigate their own institutions to see what was really going on and to look at ways in which they could improve things. Now, of course, senior managers, being senior managers, made all sorts of excuses why they couldn't get to grips with the project, so they hired in some research assistants, and I was one of them. I was an undergraduate at the time on a placement, a work placement, and I spent 6 months studying the communications happening in a children's hospital. I focused on one particular ward, Ward B3, as it happened, and I observed everyone who came in and out of that ward, and I interviewed everybody who had anything to do with the ward, and I discovered that an enormous amount of misunderstandings and lack of clarity of just assume things about other departments were not the case. And the best way I could operate on that in that context, I was invited to, I had to report back to a committee of representatives of the different departments of the hospital. And it was, I don't know what they did with the findings, but I helped them see that there were many pathologies of communication in the hospital.
Right. Bernard, one thing that I got from your book is that you have had a very long history of thinking and writing about social cybernetics. And in fact, you talk about 50 years. 50 years
Cybernetics. Yes, I mean,
cybernetics.
well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now,
my core discipline is psychology. And
but in the book, you talk about Bernard has been thinking and writing about cybernetics for 50 years. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. More than that.
Well, that's what I read in the book, you know. So.
Yeah. It's 50 years. 50, if to be exact, it'd probably be, I don't know, 55 years. Anyway, yes.
So perhaps one thing that came very clearly to me was the evolution of cybernetics. By the 1970s, cybernetics had become marginalized. Several reasons have been suggested for this. I believe two are particularly pertinent. The first is that at heart, most scientists are specialists. Having taken from cybernetics what they found valuable, they concentrated on their own interests. Second, in the USA, funding for research in cybernetics became channeled towards research with more obvious relevance for military applications, notably researching artificial intelligence. That is something that clearly you think it was the case.
That's why I wrote it, Raul, because I think that was the case.
Yeah, and the point is what comes as another thing is need for transdisciplinary methodology, how to proceed with conversations beyond objectivity. From first acknowledging that a self-organizing system does not have direct access to an external reality, rather the reality it computes, constructs, is a consequence of its interactions and with the environment. In a way, what this point is making is that self-construction is the essence of social systems, isn't it?
Self-construction is the essence of social systems. Well, it depends what you mean by self-construction. How using the word self in this context. So if you talk about social systems,
self-organization.
Well, I'm talking about self-organizing. Well, we haven't got social yet. A social, the classic example of a self-organizing system in this context, from versus context, are biological systems, living systems. So a living systems does not have direct access to some objective reality. Well, that includes us. It computes its reality as a consequence of its interactions with its environment, and also what it brings to that. But you know how its affordances, what interactions it possible for it to have. So in that context, self is loose reference to the system as an entity that the external observer is distinguishing.
Yeah. Right. So I think somehow going through the different aspects of your book, parts 1 and 2, and I suspect that I don't want to continue except if I get some ask questions from either you or from other people.
Ah, okay. Okay, Raul.
Jason, is there any question you want to bring?
So it was so good. We had a little side chat in the chat box. But I think it's a very good start.
Well,
Actually,
I'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I want to thank Raul for taking the time to, prepare his slides and to look at my book in some detail and prepare his slides and to raise these, in some cases, challenging questions. Asking me to explain myself in different terms or more clearly than I perhaps have managed to do so in the book, at least by his standards, by his expectations. Hopefully, we've been in conversation for a few years now, and hopefully we are becoming, we understand each other's viewpoints better.
Yeah, I think, Bernard, I thank you for giving all the answers and by clarifying ideas. And I think there is still room for plenty of work in the future. And that's what Jason will be doing as he moves further with the discussion of your book.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Very good start today. Bernard, do you have a plan to do a volume 2?
Sorry, Jason, what did you say?
I was asking if you have any plan to do a volume 2.
Oh, no.
Yes.
No.
Okay. Perhaps our discussion will
At the moment, I don't have a plan. Put it that way round.
So I hope Bernard will come to the point to write another book. So that's very, very desirable.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can co-author the third book. That's what we are going to do, the third group. Thank you so much for today, and looking forward to seeing you again next month in our next chapter. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye.